Tonight, though, we have Liz Jackson, and she's going to be talking about heritage gardens and what are they and how do you create one. And Liz is a resource specialist here with Cascadia. She's been with the district since February 21. And her main programs include that she works on is the heritage gardens here in Chelan County. Works on a lot of agriculture, landowner assistance and cost share programs, urban ag programs, irrigation efficiency, salmon safe certification, education outreach. She's just led a big education project with one of the schools in the area, but she works with adults and youth. She got her master's degree in fisheries and wildlife management from Oregon State in 2021. She's a member of the Wenatchee Valley chapter of Native Plant Society. And Liz enjoys traveling, gardening, hiking, and caring for foster animals on her urban ranch here in East Wenatchee. Liz, I'll unshare and turn it over to you.
Don't know. Hold on one second here.
Yep, and I'm putting that link to sign up for the in-person event in the chat.
Okay, can you see my first slide?
Absolutely.
Okay,
Yes.
Great. Excellent. All right, well, thank you for that introduction and welcome everyone in the virtual world to my talk about heritage gardens in Chelan County. I just want to kick it off by saying thank you to the previous speakers. I believe some of them are here tonight. We're just so fortunate to have these experts in our community. And so really appreciative for their talks that they've done for our Native Planting 101 series. And so what I'm going to do tonight is take pieces from all those lessons you've learned from the previous topics and how you can apply them into creating your own heritage garden on your property. So the goal here tonight is really for you to take away what is a heritage garden, what does that term mean? And then at the very end too, I have just a very short poll. So if you are able to stay the whole time, would love your feedback on just a couple of graphics that we have. Okay. All right. Now I know this is a native plant talk, but I want to start out with a little bit of history because I feel it's important to understand where conservation districts started in order to better understand our programs that we offer and the tech assistance that we provide. So if you cannot guess what this is a picture of, it is a representation of the 1930s Dust Bowl, which really essentially was a series of droughts and limited soil conservation measures on the landscape. Primarily occurred in the Great Plains, and eventually these massive dust storms made their way to the East Coast. And so it became a national crisis. And according to CBS News, this Dust Bowl killed nearly 7,000 people and left 2 million homeless. So pretty big tragedy. And so in 1935, Congress passed the Soil Conservation Act, which declared soil and water conservation a national policy and priority. And so this created the SCS, or also known as the Soil Conservation Service. And so this gentleman here is Hugh Hammond Bennett, and he was the first chief of SCS, and he is known as the father of soil conservation. And essentially he used his showmanship to merit national attention and convince the country that soil erosion was a serious problem. And so today, SCS is now known as NRCS, or the Natural Resources Conservation Service. They are in the US Department of Ag. And I just wanted to mention them because I tend to find that not a lot of folks know this branch, this federal agency, but they are available to help, especially if you are an ag producer, if you have an ag commodity. But I also want to bring them up because they have a new urban ag program. So if you do some kind of cropping system in those urban settings, they might be a resource to you. So I just want to mention there is an office in the Wenatchee area. And so just another resource available to you along with the Conservation District. Let's see. And so in 1937, FDR made it possible that local landowners were able to form soil conservation districts. And so here's a look at how many CDs we have currently in Washington. So we have 39 counties and 45 conservation districts. So some counties do have multiple CDs. And as Amanda mentioned, we are governed by 5 board members, and this is made up of diverse community members. And so if you're interested on running on our board and like conservation, please reach out. And we do, a lot of our work involves voluntary actions around the natural resources, but our heart and soul really started with soil and water conservation. And then at the bottom, I have the icon of the Washington State Conservation Commission. They're a supporter for us and help provide some funding resources. Okay, so in Washington State, RCW 89.08 was passed in 1939, which made it possible for conservation districts to be created in the state of Washington. So initially, we were separate districts. We were the Wenatchee Aniat Soil Conservation District and the Lake Chelan Soil Conservation District. And so those 2 CDs were created in 1948. And they were separated mostly because of travel. It was just really difficult to travel those long distances back then. So then in 1973, the 2 districts merged to form the Chelan County Conservation District. And then in 2007, we elected to change our name to Cascadia CD. We are fortunate because we serve all parts and residents of Chelan County, and that does include the urban areas. And then to your right here on this slide, that's a screenshot just celebrating 75 years of conservation. And so you can find this on our website. We have a series of interviews from past employees or board members and landowners. And so Peggy, who was our former project manager, director, I believe her title was, she had one of the first interviews. So you just wanted to give a plug to celebrate our 75th anniversary. Okay, and just quickly going over our services again. We do provide farm planning services, and that includes the urban ag settings. But in general, it's conservation planning, not just farm planning. And then we do have a lot of forest health programs. So Amanda had mentioned our roving chipper program, which is a great alternative to burning. We also do habitat improvements. A lot of our programs, a lot of our restoration projects are centered around the Chumstick and Little Chumstick at the moment, as well as some in the Aniat, and we're looking to branch out to the Peshastin Creek area. And we do a lot of education and outreach too, such as this Native Planting 101 event. Okay, so the reason why you all came here tonight is to learn a little more about heritage gardens. And essentially what it comes down to, these are water smart landscaping made up of mostly native plants. And so I just want to press the point that these are landscaped areas and they're not restoration sites. And another important part of the Heritage Garden program is that we're honoring the heritage of the Columbia River Basin. So we're looking at a specific geographic location in Washington State. Okay, so when was it created? Well, it started in 2010. It was formalized in 2011, and the first certified garden took place in 2012. And so it began with a couple co-founders, the Benton County, Benton Conservation District, and the Washington Native Plant Society, specifically the Columbia Basin chapter. So they had a partnership there and just began the program. So where are they found? Well, they're found in the Tri-Cities area and in Chelan County, since I'm presenting about this. And so it's actually pretty new to our county. So the program expanded in the summer of just last year, and that's in partnership with the Wenatchee Valley chapter of the Washington Native Plant Society. So really, essentially, it's up to the Conservation District staff, their capacity and their funding, in order to bring this program to the county. And so I had known about it since, I want to say 2017, 2018, joined Cascadia in 2021, and then secured some funding and got the ball rolling and was able to actually bring it to our county in 2022. So currently we're funded by the Washington State Conservation Commission, as well as the National Association of Conservation Districts, specifically through an urban ag conservation grant that I was awarded. But if you are not a Chelan County resident, you might be able to find the program in a couple other Eastern Washington counties. So there is a contact in Yakima area that you could work with, as well as Kittitas, so if you're in the Ellensburg region. And Columbia Basin Conservation District, formerly known as Grant County Conservation District, also implements this program. And so Columbia Basin, a little bit of their district is in Adams County as well. Okay, so what are they? Just to reiterate, they are landscaped areas that are designed to honor the cultural and natural heritage of the Columbia River Basin while utilizing sustainable gardening practices. And what we mean by that, we'll get into more detail, but that really gets home at the irrigation practices, as well as your design and being able to create habitat for wildlife. So one question I get a lot is just where did the name Heritage Gardens come from? And so just to press that point, it's really from the history of our area. So honoring that cultural, native, geological significance of our region. And the founders wanted to keep a very broad title because that allows us to cover a variety of topics with different speakers. So for instance, you can talk about tribal use of some of these native plants or bring in a geologist. So having a very broad implication is able to bring in a bunch of different speakers to address these various topics. Okay, and the purpose of this program. Well, first off, on your right, there is a map of the Columbia Basin. So just to remind us all of how big this area actually is. But the heart of it is to promote the use of native plants, and especially those with a cultural significance. And we'll get into what is cultural significance in a little bit. We also want to promote low water use landscaping and efficient irrigation methods, most specifically drip irrigation. So the most efficient irrigation method that we have to date. And then we also want to educate our community about the history and biodiversity of the Columbia River Basin. Okay, so a little bit about the actual process of the program. So there's different elements involved to create a heritage garden. And so these fall into 4 categories: the flora, fauna, geology, and cultural significance. And then there's also a checklist involved to meet these criteria. So on this checklist, which can also be found on the Heritage Garden website, has a list of required practices. So just meeting certain criteria and standards, which we'll get into detail a little later on. And then we also have recommended practices, which I like to refer to as technical assistance. So normally we'll come out to your site and have a site visit, and perhaps we might recommend something that you hadn't thought of, or we might see something, that something where you could actually apply a different type of conservation practice. So that's the site visits are always useful to designate recommended practices. And so those gardens that meet these minimum requirements on the checklist will receive a yard sign. And that's what our poll is going to be about at the end, if you do stick around. And so really that's just to recognize all the hard work you put in, and also to educate your neighbors and the community. Okay, so a little bit more about the process. So I think it was Mel who really touched, and Betsy too, touched a lot on, what are your objectives when you are putting in native plants? And that same concept applies to the heritage garden process. So it really starts with you and asking yourself some questions. So what are your goals for the site? What do you want to accomplish? Also, how much maintenance do you want to put into it, both in the short term and the long term? Because setting up these native gardens does take work. There's site prep involved, and then there's maintenance, and then there's annual weeding involved. So even though you might eventually get to a low maintenance garden, the initial start can be quite a time investment and potentially funding investment, just depending on how big of a size you want to take on and convert into a native garden. So your square footage is important. And I know Mel touched on that when it came to actually seeding your lawn, if you were converting your lawn to an alternative mix. And so same thing applies for heritage gardens. How much space are you looking at? Are you looking at your full property? Or are you looking at just a little corner of it? So that's all just things to consider. And then the level of difficulty. So do you want plants that are easier to grow? Some examples might be yarrow, blanket flower, Lewis flax, the penstemons, buckwheats, fleabane daisies tend to be a little easier. Goldenrod, blue bunch wheatgrass, fringe sagebrush are always a little easier to grow. Or do you want to take on more of a challenging garden? Coyote mint, the balsam roots, desert parsleys, those are a little more difficult. And especially so because certain native plants actually vanish. You just don't see them anymore. So you need to strategically place them in the garden so you can mark them either with next to a certain rock, or maybe to the right of the blue bunch wheatgrass. So just what kind of challenge are you looking for in your garden? So if you really don't have a green thumb, or you're new to native plants, you might want to stick with some of the easier native plants as you just get started. So these pictures that just popped up, those are examples of non-natives. So it would be worth just considering a couple non-natives into your garden because it adds diversity, color, and texture. It just makes the site a little more interesting. So the white cotton ball looking one, that's an Apache plume. And so it kind of just has the smoke look about it. And then that bright orange one is a firecracker penstemon. And both of these come out of the Southwest. And so they are eligible to include in your heritage garden. Another thing to consider is the availability of plants. Native plants, there's a lot of interest in them and creating these landscapes. So are the plants available that you want to install? If they're not available locally, is there a vendor within reasonable distance that you could get them from? Or is it something that maybe you might have to wait a couple years to actually acquire those plants? And so if there is a group of folks out there who has a particular native plant that they'd like to see and are certain they'll get larger quantities, it would be worth just talking to Mel about that. What's the feasibility that she actually could be able to germinate and grow some of those for purchase. And then just considering, do you want a formal garden or an informal? And so formal, I tend to think of those landscape fabrics. And a lot of houses already, like with the turnover of parcels that we have in this county, a lot of the houses already seem to have that landscape fabric built in. So do you want to take the time to remove it or keep it in? And would you prefer more of like an informal organic look? And so if you take that route, a lot of times the plants will find their happy place. So are you okay with those plants migrating to new spots within your garden? So just other things to consider. Do you want a themed garden? So, Al talked about Firewise. So do you want just strictly Firewise plants? Do you want an Old West theme? So that would be only natives. Are you interested in harvesting some of the plants for yourself? So just other ideas that you might want to consider when first thinking about your heritage garden. Also, where might you create paths and different access points? Because you want to make it inviting, and you also have to do some maintenance. So incorporating those access points would just make that a little easier. Let's see, and then site preparation. So how much time and energy do you want to invest into site prep? Or maybe you're fortunate and you have a property that's ready to go and all set up. So just other considerations around site prep too, that might change how much space you're actually looking at converting to this garden. Because if you're looking at like a whole acre, that's going to be a long process. So, you might consider breaking it up into different phases. Yeah, so your timeline, when do you want to have this done? Yeah, what are your end goals there as far as timeline goes? A lot of times we plant in the fall. So are you prepared to plant in the fall? But if you already have irrigation set up, you could go ahead and plant in the spring. All right, so other things to consider are just existing site conditions. So how much sun exposure does the site receive? Or is it shaded, mostly shaded, lightly shaded? Yeah, knowing the heat of the summer is helpful. So if you just moved into a house in the spring, it might be best to hold off to that fall or maybe even the following year. So that way you have a full understanding of the path of the sun throughout the summer. Let's see, also if there's any wind exposure. If you have a really windy site, perhaps your heritage garden might look more like a hedgerow to prevent some of that wind onslaught that we might get. And then your soil type. So it's important to examine the type of soil that you're going to be planting in. Did you remove any soil? Are you going to bring fill in? And so a lot of these native plants have these deep roots and prefer well-draining soil. So it doesn't have like a sandy component to it to provide that drainage. So it's just important to know your existing soil type. And that is something, that our staff, myself, we can help you figure that out. And then is the site sloped or is it level? What's the elevation of it? Are you near downtown Wenatchee, or are you in Squilchuck, or are you up by Leavenworth? So that's all going to change the type of plants that you might install in your garden. Do you have wildlife issues? Like I know parts of Wenatchee, there's a lot of deer browsing that goes on. Rabbits too, I know they can be a nuisance for some gardeners. So if you're one of those locations, you might consider creating cages around your plants so they get established, or possibly even fencing off the whole site so your plants get established initially. Also pets. I mean, there's a lot of folks who walk dogs. And so, do you have people are walking dogs, or maybe neighbors' pets that are coming on? Like how much of a buffer do you need to leave from the sidewalk or the road? so those pets aren't peeing on or trampling your garden. And then, do you live in a busy or quiet street? Just again, taking in the site condition, but then also considering your neighbors as well, because there are some native plants that are more aggressive, like the yarrows and the milkweeds. They tend to migrate to neighbors' yards. And so, how do you think your neighbors would feel if you installed some of those plants? Also roses, just because they're really thorny. So yeah, you might, just to stay on good terms with your neighbors, you just want to take them into consideration with the type of plants you're installing. Also, your access to water. So do you have an irrigation system already set up? Do you need to install one? Are you going to use broadcast sprinklers, or are you going to use a drip irrigation, which is the preferred method for the heritage gardens? If you don't have existing access to water, what's your plan to provide supplemental water for the initial establishment of these native plants, specifically the first 1 to 3 years? So just having that plan, because if you go away for 2 weeks in the summer and it's, we get another heat dome or really intense heat, you want to make sure someone's watering those plants so that way they have a better chance to survive. Okay, and then that's my last consideration, I believe, is just some of the non-natives you want to keep. A lot of folks have like more ornamental trees or other shrubs on their landscape, or maybe some heirloom plants. Lavender is a very popular one in this area. So just considering the non-natives that you do want to keep on your landscape instead of ripping those out and converting them to native. Okay, so I'll pause there and just take any questions about like the overview of the program, the history of the CDs, if you have any.
Feel free to put those in the chat.
And we're going to jump into the criteria next. Okay.
Liz, do you see the chat or?
I do not.
Okay.
Oh, here we go. I found it.
You got it? Okay. So Sandra.
I'm looking at it too, and I don't see any questions so far.
I think I'm going to move forward then.
Sandra has a question.
Oh, okay.
Said, can people in areas that have not signed on with the program participate? I realize we won't be eligible for technical assistance, but could we be certified? Oh, it says she sent it only to me. Okay, that's fine.
Oh, I was wondering. Okay.
Are you, I think it was Sandra, are you referring to the county that you're located in?
Sandra, you want to unmute and ask, or?
Yes, that is what I'm referring to. I'm in Okanagan County.
Yeah. Yeah, so I would encourage you to still reach out to the Okanagan Conservation District. And first off, let them know they're interested in heritage gardens, because maybe they'll eventually adopt it themselves. And they can still provide you some technical assistance and advice when it comes to native plants in those in the urban landscapes. So I definitely recommend reaching out to them. If you need any further assistance, like if they weren't able to provide that information, or you do want to get certified in the program, get in touch with me, and then we can also work with Heather Wendt down in the Tri-Cities. She's one of the founders. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah.
And a couple other questions. Is Town of Chelan included?
Yes, yes, it is. Mm-hmm.
And why is milkweed so despised?
I love milkweed, but I know some people are sick of pulling it out, since it can be a pretty aggressive spreader.
And what about Douglas County?
Douglas County,
Wenatchee.
so if you're in the East Wenatchee area, similar to Okanagan, reach out to the South Douglas Conservation District, let them know your interest, let them know you watch this webinar, and if they can't provide any tech assistance, ask them if they could refer you to Cascadia CD for that help. Yeah, if you're in Northern Douglas, then you're reaching out to Foster Creek Conservation District first. So bottom line is start with the CD who provides the programs in your area, and then they can refer you to us, and then hopefully we can work with you a little more just based on our funding.
And you could tell them that you heard Liz talking about it.
Yeah. Yep.
All right, I think we're good for now.
I'm going to keep moving on then. Oh, yes. Thanks, Amanda, for putting those in the chat, the contacts. Okay, hopefully transition. All right, so getting into the criteria a little more, we're going to start with flora. And in my opinion, these standards aren't too rigorous. So hopefully you feel the same way. So really what we're looking for is just 5 different species of plants. And so when we say these 5 different species, you also probably want to consider the type of plant they are. Like for instance, 1 grass, 1 shrub, maybe like 2 wildflowers and 1 subshrub. So having that diversity. But most gardens tend to have a lot more than 5 species of plants. Also, the criteria that we have is 75% are native to Washington state. And not only that, the plant has to be sourced from the Pacific Northwest. So you can't go over to the Midwest and buy a plant that's native to Washington state. We want to keep it more localized in that sense. And so these percentages are based on the number of plants that are installed. And so 30% would be needing less than 10 inches of water annually. In the Wenatchee area, our max precip is like 8 to 10 inches annually. So because Chelan County is so unique, having the foothills of the Cascade, all the way up to the Cascades near like Stevens Pass, there's flexibility. If you're in that Leavenworth area, there's flexibility that we're going to tweak these standards a little bit, because we do recognize that those regions get 20 inches of precip annually, sometimes more. So bear with me here. We are adjusting those standards for like the Leavenworth, Lake Wenatchee areas. But in general, because the start out of the Tri-Cities, and we're looking at the Columbia Basin, we're looking at 30% of your plants installed needing less than 10 inches of water annually. And kind of go off that a little more, no more than 10% of your plants needing more than 30 inches of water annually. So again, that might be tweaked a little bit for that Leavenworth area, just because there already is that higher precipitation rate. And so kind of like I was mentioning, yeah, we can customize these planting designs for those microclimates throughout the Chelan County area. And we're also working with the Native Plant Society just to tweak those criteria. And another important aspect is just make sure your plants are blooming throughout the growing season. So getting started as early as now and going all the way to October to make sure we have enough habitat for our native bees and native pollinators and other wildlife. Okay, and so for heritage gardens, we recommend it's best to install live plants. So these are just some photos taken at Derby Canyon last year. It sets you up for the greatest success if you put in live plants as opposed to seeding. That being said, as you get more experience and maybe you want to try germinating some native plants on your own through that cold treatment, by all means, you're more than welcome to. But through this process and for the quicker certification, it's just easier to do the live plants, and then you can grow your garden, you can expand your garden from there. Okay, so our fauna criteria is at least 2 plant species having wildlife value. So for instance, producing fruit or seed. We don't have too many that produce nuts, but yeah, and then when we say wildlife, native bees, native butterflies, those insects and pollinators are included in that category. And so Betsy goes into a lot of detail about some plant options that you can include on your landscape when it comes to providing habitat for wildlife. Okay, so as far as the cultural significance is concerned, we're really just looking for one plant species to represent that, but there's a lot of them to choose from, so you'll probably put in more than one. And when we say cultural significance, it's broken up into two categories. So the first is the significance of indigenous peoples to the Columbia Basin. So incorporating the ethnobotany of the tribes by including plants that were used for food, shelter, or medicine. And then the second aspect is if it was referenced in Meriwether Lewis's journals or other early explorers and botanists like David Douglas, for instance. So if it was referenced in some of their journals, that would also be considered a culturally significant plant. Right, so now we're just going to look at some plants that you might be interested to install on your property and into your heritage garden. So the first is Monroe's globe mallow, also known as orange globe mallow. I know the previous presentations talked a little bit about this, but it's just such a great plant. It's one of the few that has that orange color, so it really adds a pop of color to the landscape. And it has just such great native bee value to it. A lot of times you'll find the bees like napping in the petals if you look closely. And so that's a photo there of one. And it's very drought tolerant. The globe mallow reseeds itself, so it's easy to maintain. It does get to be a pretty robust size, so nearly 3 feet tall, could get even larger than 3 feet tall, and it does have a pretty wide width too, so you want to give it enough space as it matures. It does like full sun, and one interesting thing about globe mallow is if you are over watering it, the stems tend to lie flat on the ground. So that's just one indication that maybe you're giving it too much water, cut back a little, or maybe change the emitter size to be a little less. And then hopefully you'll see those stems start to perk up again. Okay, so I am trying to cover like one plant in each of our categories. So that was our wildflower. This one is considered a shrub, so golden currant. Again, just like excellent wildlife value. Has these produces a beautiful fruit. And its Latin name actually translates to acid tasting golden. But it is very easy to grow. If you do include this in your garden, you want to give it ample space because you can see it gets to be about 8 feet tall and as wide as 6 feet. So you might need to do just like a little bit of pruning to keep it in check too. And so, yeah, it's found really throughout the United States. It tends to prefer areas that are less than 20 inches of annual precipitation. And so if you have an area on your property where it gets a little bit of shade, this plant might be a good fit for that. Oh, and then all these little icons down below, those just represent if it's good for, so the bee would be our native bees, and then native butterflies, so that's the pollinators, and then we have a little like goldfinch representing the birds, also small mammals, and then our cultural significance. So that's just helps designate this plant would help meet those criteria. So if you decide to include golden currant, you'd hit on that cultural aspect, you'd hit on the wildlife. And it is a native plant, so it's kind of like a 3-in-1 there. All right, snow buckwheat. This is Betsy's favorite. So snow buckwheat, wow, it's just a fabulous native plant. I see it a lot in the Wenatchee Valley area. It's a fantastic plant too, just with the color changes. So when the small flowers do start to bloom, it has a little bit of this like pink hue to it because of this pink stripe. So you got like this pink and this white, and then eventually it turns to like this copper color throughout the winter. So it still is providing this color pop during those more dreary days. And so, yeah, it's native to Washington, Oregon, Idaho. It does grow pretty tall, like those flowers will get pretty tall. And so then come the spring, you can break off some of those old stems by hand, just very carefully. And just fun fact, it's a larval host for the Mormon metalmark butterfly, and it's also specially used by the Ackman blue butterfly. And just a little bit of cultural significance here. So this was used by the Okanagan Colville tribe as a cold remedy to treat cuts. And so it was also collected by David Douglas, who was an early 19th century Scottish naturalist. And so the Latin word niveum actually means snow white. And then we can't forget our grasses. They're very important to for larval habitat, and they're also just beautiful. Great to add a little texture, something more interesting into your garden. And so blue bunch wheatgrass, it's one of the dominant species found in the shrub steppe. It's also a great firewise plant too. And it's important food for deer, elk, and cattle. So I used to work more with the rangeland side in Douglas County, and a lot of the forage plans, you know, a lot of the cattle would be dependent on having that blue bunch in the rangeland. So that holds true. Let's see, and then fun fact about it, the Okanagan Colville tribe grazed horses on blue bunch wheatgrass and even bathed with this plant to ease symptoms of arthritis. Yeah, so just a really great plant. It's drought tolerant too, so it can live in those less than 10-inch precipitation range, as high as 20 inches. And if you keep it watered throughout the growing season, it should retain a little bit of that blue-green color. But it's also really nice to just let it go dormant and go to its natural tan color sometimes. Okay. So just a little bit about the geological significance. So this is a map of the basalt flows where the lava accumulated to a thickness of more than 6,000 feet, thousands of years ago. So I just want to share that map. I thought it was pretty interesting, just the whole area it covered. Okay, and so this map now is a representation of the ice dam and where it was being blocked. And so we found this on hugefloods.com. Anyways, I thought it was a really good map to share, just to touch on the geological significance of our area. Okay, so when it comes to the geological features, again, it's the basalt flows and ice age floods that we want to represent, because that helped form our beautiful landscapes in the area we live in today. And so we're really just asking for one feature. We just want some kind of rock in your garden to honor the significance of these ice age floods and basalt flows. And you have a lot of options to choose from. So we don't expect you to go out and buy those expensive basalt columns, although they are impressive and look very nice. You know, we're doing this on a budget in ways. So yeah, it could be, if you happen to have those columns, it's great. You can incorporate them into your garden, or you can do like some of a mulch type. So either like the crushed or the larger basalt. You could lay out flat stones for your footpath. That would count towards the geological feature. If you're fortunate to have erratics or large boulders already present on your landscape, you know, if it's already there, that counts towards it if you're building your garden around it. And so if you're not familiar with that term erratics, I just like a little definition here. So it's like the small to large boulder sized granite that was actually carried during the glacial recession. And then when that ice melted, they were dropped in place. So there's just some really big ones out there. River rock would count too. Or if you want to create a little bench out of some rocks, that would count as well. Okay, so this is just talking a little bit about the other required practices. So I had mentioned the importance of having some sort of irrigation system, at least to get your plants established initially, like for the first 1 to 3 years. A lot of the plants you will incorporate, you could probably pull that irrigation eventually, especially true if you're gonna put in sagebrush, because overwatering it for more than 2 years, like pouring water on it, will just kill it. So I wanted to provide you a diagram to give you an idea of something that you could install per plant. So this is just simple PVC pipe with a bunch of holes drilled through it. And the idea is you're getting really deep down into the roots. So making sure that that water is penetrating all the way down using the strip emitter. And those emitters can come in different sizes, just depending on the type of plant. And so we can help you figure out, what's the best emitter size for the plant that you are installing. Oh, and I should mention too, with irrigation, the way I design these plans, we're also looking at your before and after. So a before photo of the site, an after photo of the site, we're treating it like we would any kind of conservation plan that we do with our agriculture landowners. And so along with that too is before and after of your water use. So for instance, if it was a lawn that you use, pop-up sprinkler to throughout the summer, and then you're converting this to drip irrigation, we'll actually work with you to get water estimates on how many gallons you've saved by converting it to this heritage garden. I'm getting there. I know we've got a little time left. Let's see. So weed control. Yeah, can't press that enough. I know it was talked about in the other presentations. You have to do weed control, and you can't have any Washington state listed noxious weed in your garden. So you can't, decide to plant it in there, and you have to take management action and control efforts to remove it from your garden too. And so this USDA, plants.usda.gov is a good resource for that, to look up any whether a plant is actually listed in Washington state. And another great resource too is our state noxious weed board. So this is a little bit of an older list now, but they have a whole list that you can look at. And then our county, so Chelan County, has a noxious weed board too. And I believe Julie Sanderson had presented in years past for Native Planting 101. So just a great resource for you. Other counties have noxious weed boards as well. Everyone but Douglas. But you have a cooperative weed management group that you can talk to. Okay, and then one of the last required practices is just having compliance. So if you're going to move forward with this and you live in a vicinity that has an HOA, just running it by, making sure you're not breaking any rules. Also, if you are in that urban setting, making sure it complies with all laws and codes. And so we really leave that up to the landowner to verify all that and check that. Okay, so I'll pause there for questions. Oh, I see Betsy raised her hand.
I just have a general comment about code. If you live definitely in Wenatchee and probably in Leavenworth and have a corner lot, be aware of the triangle, the line of sight at intersections. A lot of people completely ignore it, and it's a pretty important element of code. Basically, you can't have anything 30 inches above existing grade to allow vehicles and pedestrians and bicycles visual access. So just a heads up on that.
Great, that's an excellent point. Thanks, Betsy. See, question, how do we sign up? So I'm going to put my email in the chat, and please send me an email and we can arrange a site visit. And then Joanne asked, do you work with farms to develop pollinator strips along properties? We do. It's not a common practice, or at least I haven't had experience with it in the last couple of years, but a lot of our partners have worked with them, like the Xerxes Society, I know, is working with some landowners to get pollinator habitat in. I believe NRCS has also worked with a number of landowners to install like hedgerows and other pollinator strips. So not so much a common practice for us. Our cost share tends to lean more towards those irrigation efficiencies. So upgrading tree fruit blocks to a more efficient system. Yeah. But not to say that we couldn't. Okay, I think I'm gonna keep going on. We'll have one more chance for questions at the end. I just want to show you guys some pictures. I know we're running a little tight on time now. So these are just some before and afters. Full disclosure, these all come from the Tri-Cities because I'm building my database of before and after photos for Chelan County. But I just want to give you an idea of what it could be if you decide to transform a section of your property or all of your property. So they do come in all shapes and sizes. This one here, Cheryl's Heritage Garden. So you can see she focused on kind of this corner here of her property. And so down below is the after photo where she put a lot more of this rock in and some native plants. And then if you look to the photo to the right, it's a lot more gravelly. And that's because Cheryl noticed that a lot of school kids, when they get off the bus, they just haphazardly walk off the sidewalk onto her property. So she wanted to create like a little bit of a buffer to give room so they're not trampling those plants. And so you could tell this is like a little early on in her installing the garden. So it looks a lot differently today. It's really come into itself. So here's another one, Rob and Sheila's garden. So this couple travels a lot, and so they wanted something that's low maintenance, didn't have to worry about, wanted a bunch of native plants. And so this corner of their property, they had all these hedges and they just got tired of trimming them and having to deal with it. So they took it out, and lo and behold, there was this fabulous boulder in the center. And so they converted it to be more of this focal piece for their garden. And so then they planted around it. And so here I'm going to show you. So this picture I just put up, that was taken June of 2022. So you can see how much it's matured in like this I think it was about 5, maybe 8 years later. And so over to the left, we have a globe mal in the front and then a patchy plume behind it. Looks like we've got a rabbit brush across the way that has really grown in size. Looks like they added some grasses and then a snow buckwheat down at the bottom right corner there. And one thing, that you just have to consider too, there is a stop sign. So they will have to make sure that that stop sign isn't blocked, but just, really works out for them. And so they started with this piece and then they converted their entire property. So this is just one small section, but they've done it in phases throughout the years. Here's another one. So this was more of a turf grass. And so Martin then converted to this, rather small heritage garden, but manageable. And so you can see he added some like a walking path there too to access it and have people admire all the different native plants. And he elected to go with a wood mulch. So sorry, Al. Okay, and then this is just to show you a little bit what our program will produce when we do provide that planting design. So it comes up with these different little icons, and there is a legend that comes along with it, so you can distinguish the different type of plants. And so when we do these designs, you want to represent the plant at maturity, so you know how much space it's actually going to take up. And then to show you too, we're not just limited to landowners, house owners, but we also work with like public gardens and municipalities. And so this is one example out of Kennewick. So this demonstration garden actually mimics the Kennewick logo. So you can kind of see the sun with its different rays. And so this is a very more formal garden, designed in a way that like plants are grouped together. So I think in like the top right corner, if I remember correctly, that's a butterfly preferred plants. Up above that is sand loving plants. And so when I visited the site, you could actually see the bees burrowing in the sand. So just something to consider if you want to provide that habitat, is you can actually, like, manipulate the site a little more. I think they even have like cactus in here. But anyways, yeah, so if you go to Kennewick, worth stopping in at Hanson Park here. So you might ask, okay, so who are you working with now? Well, we're talking about getting the certification for a number of demonstration gardens in the area. I'm not gonna tell you specifically which site, but I've been working with WU Extension Master Gardeners and some of the members of the Wenatchee Valley Chapter Native Plant Society. Also been talking with landowners in Leavenworth, landowners in Wenatchee. Seems to be a lot of interest in the program in those areas so far. Also Rotary clubs and some nonprofit organizations that want to create a garden at their office space, as well as some schools too, I should mention. And just to bring it up again, this is really focused on technical assistance and providing information and sharing information. So unfortunately, we don't have a cost share associated with it. And Cascadia no longer has a plant sale, but we can refer you to those resources. And obviously Mel is an excellent resource for us here in this area. Okay, and so this was on Make a Difference Day last year, so October 22nd of 2022, where 3 of the Rotary clubs got together and installed a garden in the Columbia Station Link Transit in Wenatchee. It does get a lot of foot traffic, so we will see how it fares. But they have a program to install this pollinator highway from British Columbia down to Prosser, Washington. So we're talking a 500-mile stretch, and they're working with the Department of Transportation. So this is one of the first gardens that went in to meet those goals for a pollinator highway. And so there's more planned. So you might see them pop up in our area and possibly in Douglas too. And great way to get kids involved as well and educate them. Okay, and then I have to give a plug for Saddle Rock. If any of you have been to the more southern trailhead, we actually do have a native plant garden there. So we're in the process of revitalizing it. So if you're interested in doing that and taking part of it, love to hear from you. Please contact me. I'm looking for folks who might want to help out. So we're looking to put in irrigation system, more native plants, and then get some more rock mulch on there. There's just this ever persistent challenge of this weed bank around it. So it's a never ending project. But anyway, so the picture on the left, there was a Boy Scout helping me out there. We did take a bunch of the sagebrush out just because we want to make room for other native plants. But anyways, yeah, Saddle Rock gets a lot of visitors. And the great thing about these demonstration gardens is then you can go use them for inspiration for yourself. So which plants do you like? Which ones don't you like? Do you see native bees or pollinators gravitating towards that plant? So just ways to inspire you as well. And then just kind of the end of my presentation here. So just some resources. The Heritage Garden Program does have its own website. It's hgcd.info. And we're actually launching a new website next month. So April is Native Plant Appreciation Month, and that's where we're gonna launch it. And so you could actually contact me directly through this portal. And if you live in a different county too, you can go and contact the other CDs for a site visit and get your own heritage garden. And then I just want to highlight that resources tab at the top. There's a lot of good information about getting started, vendor vendor lists, plant selection lists, also the certification process, and some information about soil types in there. And then just a couple more resources. Of course, Derby Canyon Natives. Mel's got some great information on her website. Also the Burke Herbarium, which I believe that was native only. So you might not find the non-natives there. And then this plant selection guide on the left, that was written by Donna Lucas and Heather Wendt, who were the co-founders for the Heritage Garden program. So here's a copy of it here. You can buy it on the Native Plant Society website. It's just like an example of what it might look on the inside. Gives you some fun information. I don't know if you can really see it with my background. I think it's down to like $31.50 on the Native Plant website. And it's also available at our library, from what I've learned. But just another way to get inspiration for which plants you might want to include. And then, of course, I can help out with some other recommendations. So here's my contact. Yeah, please get in touch if you're interested. Again, the Heritage Garden website, hdcd.info. We also have a Facebook page. So if you become a Heritage Garden, we'd love to feature you on social media to show off all your hard effort. And if you'd like to meet in person, I will be at Pybus Public Market on April 1st for Nonprofit Day, as well as April 22nd, which is Earth Day. And I believe Kirk will be with me too. I don't know, do we have time? Can we do the poll now? Should we take questions first?
Let's take questions first.
Okay.
And just clarify, Liz, for people who may not know, what to get you to come out and help them with their heritage garden, what's that cost?
Nothing. It's free. Yay.
Yeah, just want to make sure that's clear to everybody who's
Yeah.
familiar with Conservation District.
Betsy, do you have a question? It looks like your hand's raised.
That was accidental, but Earth Day Fair, everybody should be at Pybus for Earth Day Fair. Gonna be great.
It's a lot of fun. Yeah.
Well, people are waiting to put questions in. I'm going to put the link to the sign up again for the in-person event if you didn't get signed up earlier and you would like to.
And do you want to go ahead and do the poll, Liz,
Yeah,
while we give people a few minutes?
Yeah, let's do the
Type in
poll.
questions?
Okay, great. Okay, so the transition, there we go. All right. Well, I'm in the process of redesigning the yard sign for the program in Chelan County. And so I was hoping, since I have a captive audience, that you'd be willing to vote on your top 2 favorite designs. So I'm going to go through them slowly. So in the poll, this one that first popped up, that's designated as blue. And our next option is cream. Third option is what we're calling a cream fade, because you see it's a little darker at the top and kind of fades out. Green fade. It's a little hard to make out there, but it is darker at the top. And then white fade. So these are the 5 designs we're considering. Which one would you feel most proud of to have in your front lawn? And also consider, we do have a lot of sun exposure, so there might be some fading going on. I would say just your gut instinct here, what your top 2 favorite are. And so I don't know if Kirk's actually administered, so I think Kirk just went and administered the poll.
I'm trying. We haven't done this before.
Yeah, this is our first time trying the poll feature.
Do you see the poll?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so this is just question number 1, and then I'll transition to question number 2 here in about 10 seconds. Okay, so I'm going to move to question number 2. So we were also considering whether it should be a vertical or horizontal design. So again, gut reactions. Which one would you like to have displayed in your front yard? And I just picked blue as an example. Okay, awesome.
Shall
Thank
we
you.
end the poll here and share results? Already voted?
5 more seconds.
All right. I'm going to stop the poll and share results.
Okay. All right. It seemed pretty split on the vertical versus horizontal. Have to offer one of each. Okay, great. Thank you everyone for your opinions. We will seriously take them into consideration.
All right. Any final questions? Debbie?
Actually, it's John.
Oh,
Kirk.
okay.
Yeah. I wonder about the link to the personal with the visit that you'd sign up for that. Could you tell me where that's displayed at so I could sign up?
For the Heritage Garden?
Yeah. Well, no, at the end of the year
Oh, the in-person.
In-person.
Okay. Okay. I put a link in the chat.
in the chat. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
And I'll put it in again. You bet.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah. Other questions? All right. Well, thank you all very much. And Liz, thank you very much. It was awesome. I learned a lot.
Yeah, I did too. Thanks, Liz. It was great.
And also, one other thing we're trying new this evening is whenever we end the meeting, you should get a link to a survey for it's the same survey I sent out for the other sessions, but you should automatically get that link when we close the meeting. So again, thank you all very much. And let us know if you have questions, or contact Liz if you want more info about the Heritage Gardens.
Thank you all for joining us. We'll see you next week for the Q&A session.
Thank you guys.
Have a good night.
Good night.
Bye.
Good night.